Hello. I've always seen libraries as sacred spaces, so I really want to express deepest gratitude to Priya and the Forbes Library for welcoming me tonight. I'm speaking tonight from 2 whole books and the early draft of the 3rd book, so I won't be able to cover everything by any means, but I do want to mention that our research showed, our most recent book's research showed, that libraries are the #1 most loved and welcoming space for 100 plus respondents. So thank you, Forbes and Priya. I'm Jennifer Brunton, PhD. I am not caused by environmental toxins. I'm here to talk to you this evening about 2 integrally connected things. So practicing advocacy, allyship, and activism, and then building independence. So both of these things I'm going to speak about in ways that are empowering, affirming, inclusive, effective, and practical. I've been especially moved and asked particularly to speak to advocacy and activism efforts lately because we're living in an unprecedented time of the attempted erasure of decades, if not centuries, of progress in civil rights. None of us can stand by in this context because who will they come for next? Like many marginalized people, people of color, LGBTQIA+ people, and other disabled folks, autistic people have been oppressed, marginalized, experimented on, and othered for centuries, including under Hans Asperger in Nazi Germany in the 20th century. Just the other night, I was reading a random book about health. I have some autoimmune stuff, and I try to work on it with diet and stuff like that. So I'm reading this random health book, and it claimed in the introduction that the suggestions that you would find in the book would eradicate awful things like diabetes, obesity, and autism. So it sometimes feels like you get a lot of little micro assaults like that day to day as an autistic person. And now there's a lot more of that different kinds of discrimination becoming kind of openly possible in ways that never were before. So I'm not going to focus on that today. I'm going to focus on positive change and evolution, but I do feel like we need these things more than ever before. So even as those of us who don't fit the currently dominant mold of who's valuable as a person, even as we're increasingly seeing our rights and wellness threatened, we can take strength in the fact that neurodiversity activism is nonetheless a vital part of a lot of growing self-advocacy and other civil rights movements. The world really needs us, so we're going to grow tools together tonight. The tools and principles that we gleaned from our research really do, in most cases, apply to all differences. So I'll be speaking specifically to the kind of neurodivergence called autism, but from a perspective that celebrates allyship and activism and advocacy in all forms that promote true, unconditional, comprehensive equality, equity, and acceptance. So let's start by making this into a safe space. And for those of you who are on the live stream, please try to create that virtual safe space. I invite you to relax into a refuge where we're all accepted and affirmed, where we all have room to grow, and we can uplift each other as we do so. So if growing and listening for you means fidgeting or taking a break or stimming or closing your eyes, we're here for that. Welcome everyone, and I really mean everyone. So housekeeping, I'm going to pause for clarification after each section, and then at the end, I'll pause and see if there are any questions. I have a resource page for discounts and contacts and mailing list, etc. That's going to be in a QR code on the last slide, as well as a QR code that will link to the hub page for both of our first 2 discussion guides. Also, and this is me downselling, we have a free online discussion guide for both of our Actually Autistic guides, and each of those is really in-depth and basically encapsulates the book. So you could go to that link that's going to be in the QR code at the end, or look on Jessica Kingsley Press for the Actually Autistic guides, and there's a link where you can download these free discussion guides, also in their free online resources. So you can really kind of learn a large portion of what we talk about there. As well, the stage 4 of the 2nd book, which is entitled Advocating for More Inclusive Cultures, Governments, and Worldviews, and that's one of the main things I'll be talking about tonight, is free online as a download. That is in part because my co-author and I have a very strong commitment to social justice, but it's also because we wrote too much, and the publisher said that we couldn't include it all in the book, so we did it online. So I'm going to start just with a little bit of an introduction and then go through this agenda, talking about principles of allyship and advocacy, tools for activism, building independence, and then some ways that we can look at uniting and collaborating. In the audience, some of you may be self-advocates, parents, caregivers, other loved ones. Maybe you're a professional, but most of those groups have often had to turn to neurotypical experts to guide their advocacy efforts. And so that was kind of the impetus behind our first book, because we feel, and I'll go a lot more into this later, that we feel that autistic people themselves are the experts as well, if not more so. So that said, a lot of us, even when we are interacting or learning from other autistic advocates, we always feel like we can do better. So I'm going to share some affirming ways to do so tonight based on the findings from our books. And just to set some grounding here, in all of my work and all of my efforts, advocacy, allyship, activism, I operate from what's called a social model of disability. So that means that disability stems from aspects of environments and interactions that are disabling to people with differences from the typical person, for whom the typical ableist world is overwhelmingly designed. So the tools I talk about are designed to change the laws, policies, attitudes, environments, cultures, etc., that are disabling to us, not to change us. So my first book with the amazing Jenna Gensick is called The Actually Autistic Guide to Advocacy. And in that book, we develop principles for advocacy based on insights from more than 100 interviews with autistic people. And these principles can shape advocacy, self-advocacy, guide the efforts of caregivers, professionals, and others who care about autistic people. And then in our second book, The Actually Autistic Guide to Building Independence, we again relied on advice and perspectives from more than 100 autistic teens, young adults, and adults to explore respectful, inclusive, empowering ways of building your own life based on your own goals, or to ally with someone who's doing so. And we've started on our third book. So tonight I'm going to go into the principles from book 1 and then explore how to use them in various facets of activism, advocacy, and independence, as in book 2, to empower ourselves and others. So as I said, I'm Jennifer Brunton. I was assigned female at birth, and I use she, they pronouns. I'm an autistic mother of an autistic child and 2 likely neurodivergent granddaughters. And I work in the field of neurodiversity, so I relate with most of you. But I'm also talking from my own perspective. I grew up undiagnosed in the 70s and 80s, and that was pretty rough. There wasn't really an idea of that there was ever any female autistic people then, and people weren't even really aware of autism very much, never mind accepting. But people could tell I was a little different when I was a little girl, and my teachers and my parents wanted to figure out why I was so different, so they had me tested. And, you know, as with many AFAB females, or AFAB people, all the things were seen as something else. So many autistic AFAB people are diagnosed with anxiety or OCD, or they're just seen as quirky, or sometimes some of our special interests kind of serve the female role in a sense. Like some of my interests actually involved makeup and friendship, so that kind of helped me mask or pass in retrospect. But I was also super obsessed with a whole lot of other things, like dinosaurs that weren't necessarily so typical. So they had me tested, and they figured out that all of the things, my obsessions, my migraines, my being bullied and quirky and having low muscle tone, they were all because I was a genius. But to me, it was obvious that something about me made me wrong. Like, it sounds like it would be really exciting to be a genius, but actually I could tell I was just not right in this regular world. And I felt like I was wrongly oversensitive to my physical and sensory environments. I felt like I was wrong about how I acted around people. I felt like the way I saw the world was wrong, and my black and white thinking was always wrong. So I went through life this way until I watched my autistic kid grow up, and I realized, wait, there's nothing wrong with him. So that's kind of how I became an activist. It's also how I began to accept myself. And parenting my perfect son was also how I began thinking about the amazing elements of neurodivergence too. So, I mean, we know the world is a hot mess right now. I think it's pretty obvious to everybody. And I said I wasn't going to talk about that too much, so I'm not going to go into the details, but I think it's very clear right now that we need new ways of thinking, and autistic people definitely have new ways of thinking. But to have a positive impact, we need more leeway and skills to live our own dreams. And to do that, we need the opportunities and rights to do so. So our families need to guide us in affirming ways. And our teachers and other professionals, our roommates, our friends, partners, employers, all need to operate from an accepting and autism-friendly perspective. So how do we get there? We can do this using principles and practices that are gleaned from autistic people themselves, and we can develop actionable, empowering ways to improve life for all autistic people, whether that's through advocacy or activism, or it's through building interdependence, which I'll talk about more later, and or independence. And these kind of advances for autistic people will not only enable each of us to thrive, but it'll help us fully bring our ideas and inventions and insights to a world that really needs them. I'm going to pause between sections really quickly just to see if anyone needs any clarification. And I was deputized to let people online know that if you have any questions, like burning questions or clarification questions, that you can email them to the reference librarian. reference@forbeslibrary.org, and they'll share those questions with me. But meanwhile, right now, I'm not, what I do in between sections is more like, was there a word you didn't understand or a concept you didn't understand? So, questions? Okay. Thanks. Okay. So this is the foundation of pretty much, you can take these principles and pretty much do anything with them. So these are our 5 foundational principles, which are our most basic tools in our efforts to make the world a better place for all autistic people. So principle 1 is practice acceptance first. How do we do that? So just look around you, wherever you are in the live stream or this room, and accept everyone you see unconditionally. That's literally all it takes. You don't need to talk to anyone first. You don't even need to see their face. And guess what? If you're looking at someone you already know, start completely accepting them now without wanting them to change, which I know is crazy, right? And then if you're looking at someone you don't know, accept them before you know anything about them. We shouldn't have to know everything or anything at all about another person to accept them. And we shouldn't need anyone to change before we accept them, especially with so many things that we can't change or shouldn't have to change. So your age, your education, your abilities, your disabilities, your neurology, your nationality, your financial status, your ethnicity, your gender expression or identity, all of those details have nothing to do with our worth as human beings. Principle 2, center actually autistic perspectives. So in this principle holds that we need to value the insights, ideas, opinions, and lived experiences of autistic people themselves. So whether that's when it comes to what we need or want or hope for, whether it's about how our minds work, how our bodies feel, and then rather than asking us to change, find out from our perspectives how we can update spaces, how we can evolve relationships, cultures, materials, and attitudes so the world is less disabling to us. Autistic people are the experts on our own brains and experiences, so our perspective should be front and center, whether it's in personal interactions or when working to make the world a better place for us. Principle 3, use language with care. So doing the work to learn about language, right, is a huge service to everyone around you and to yourself. And then you can use language and speech to interact and express yourself carefully and respectfully and thoughtfully. So, and that means with everyone. children, elders, and even teenagers included. And I think it's really important for my self-advocates out there to know that the language we use when we talk to ourselves is really important too. Principle 4, remember everybody's unique. So autism is often confused with intellectual disability, being young and male. It's also often confused with mental health differences. It's not a mental health difference, it's a neurological difference. Many autistic people will have mental health challenges simply from being autistic in a neurotypical world, but autism itself is not inherently any of those things. So as with everyone else, other differences and disabilities can occur in autistic people, but the only thing most of us have in common is being autistic. Everything else is different, just like with all humans. And then the fifth and final principle, it's a little trendy, but it's the growth mindset, right? So learn from your mistakes. A growth mindset holds that making mistakes is natural and inevitable, and it frames mistakes as learning opportunities. So in our work, we learned very viscerally, actually. We both started the first book, and we would get really upset if someone didn't like the language we used or called us out on something. And then somehow we began to realize the more that we kind of made mistakes and just kept trying and then updated what we were doing, it was actually a really good thing. So we got to a point where we were really welcomed opportunities to learn and grow. So that's what we learned from our work. We learned that from so many of our respondents that learning from our mistakes is one of the main things that can help us do better, whatever our neurology. And what that does for advocates and allies is that it really empowers them to fill their role in an affirming way. And for self-advocates too, and especially for self-advocates, it helps us to become more successful in achieving our goals, because if mistakes are part of the process, then you're not failing when you're trying, right? If you just keep going. So whether you're a self-advocate or an advocate or an activist or an ally, mindsets and actions that truly advance actually autistic goals of inclusion and achievement are fundamentally based on these key inclusive values. So the ones I just talked about, practicing acceptance above all. And again, that's not just talking about neurodiversity here, right? We're talking about all differences and intersectionalities. Centering actually autistic perspectives, being aware that language evolves and using it with care, respecting the unique aspects of every human being, and knowing we all make mistakes. And these principles, these 5 principles, shape our practices because we rely on the values underneath these principles to guide our thoughts and words and actions and interactions. Any questions on this one? Have you got any? No. Okay. So a truly inclusive culture or society or government lifts up and empowers everyone. In that way, people can live their lives as they choose. So the Actually Autistic Guide to Building Independence provides this really overarching view of every aspect of adulting, autistic adulting, that we could come up with based on the perspectives and insights from our respondents. A colleague recently summed it up as, there's a way to do what you want to do, let's figure it out. Many of the most intellectually or scientifically or academically gifted people I know are autistic, but like me, many of us don't have an automatic or intuitive grasp of the many facets of independence, or we may need more support with some or all aspects of it. And that's where interdependence, which I'll talk more about, comes in. But all of us, in our own ways, really want independence. So that's why we touch upon a lot of different topics and offer kind of general advice. Having headings like transportation might seem a little vague or remedial for the average neurotypical person, but it literally took me until I was in my late 30s to drive, and I have an Ivy League PhD, so I have mixed skills in some ways. So the big takeaway on that, though, is that making the assumption that knowledge and skills equal intelligence and worth is so problematic, and unfortunately it's also very common. So I'm only going to be able to touch on a very small portion of what we talk about in the book, but I hope it will give you, along with these principles, give you enough insight to begin to get into your own particular context. And also, again, those online free discussion guides can be really helpful in that regard. So 1 in 31 people is currently diagnosed autistic. 1 in 31, that's the new statistics. BIPOC and AFAB people are way underdiagnosed, so I think that's actually a pretty low number. 1 in 5 people is neurodivergent, so that's a lot of different goals and dreams. This is some of my family members, so it's probably more, it's definitely more than 1 in 5. So in the first book, in both books, we start at the personal level. We start with strategies for family and home and personal space, and then we move all the way up to like societal and global change. And we're trying to, I guess one of the main messages that we have in the book and that I want to really stick to tonight is just this idea that I was sort of just talking about, is that knowledge and skills do not equal intelligence and worth. So what we're trying to do is like sort of give an overview of the many different aspects of independence, and then people can, in these 1 in 5 neurodivergent people, will have very different things that are important to them, but they'll all kind of be able to use the principles that we talk about to approach these different matters in a really affirming, empowering way. So we start at the home level, and then we go sort of to the middle level, which talks about schools and work, which may include volunteering or job training or interning. We talk about college, moving out on your own in a variety of ways, whether that's living on your own, living with a roommate, living in a group setting, living at home but trying to have a little more independence, financial skills, and a lot more. So as I said, we start at home. You can take those 5 principles that I just talked about to delve into how to make your home a safe and affirming space. So for example, if you want to develop a truly inclusive family relationships and home life that are truly accepting, that honor diversity, that use language carefully, they come out in more specific ways in a specific setting. So we learned by deeply listening to our actually autistic respondents that several things about that are key. And these things about home life are crucial, whether you're an autistic person who's growing up or wanting to grow your autonomy, and who is wanting to think about what you need to feel supported in your home as you venture out into the world. Or if you're a parent or other family member, partner, a professional working with a person or family, these vital aspects of having an affirming home are the same for all of those different population groups. So these are ways to nurture the strengths and capacities that are needed for self-advocacy, activism, independence, and healthy interdependence. Understanding that all young people need a refuge in the home. Our respondents talked again and again about how important it had been for them growing up and attempting to begin to go out in the world as a self-advocate and build independence, how important it had been for them to have a refuge in their home. Or some of them talked about how devastating it was to not have a refuge in the home. But we always heard that having that safe space at home can be perhaps especially important for autistic people because we can often be othered outside the home. We may have sensory processing differences that make venturing out of a safe space harder. So it's good to have some place where you're not feeling overwhelmed. Another vital aspect of home life is, and this is super important, is avoiding generalization about life skills or what it takes to be successful. That can be a really triggering word for a lot of autistic people. And this idea is acceptance-driven, but it also relates to the idea of healthy interdependence, right? Different people need different supports to achieve their own goals in their own ways. And something that a lot of people don't realize is that the neurotypical world is literally full of interdependence and supports that we take for granted because they apply to almost everyone, right? So I'm talking about libraries, I'm talking about roads, bank loans, schools. And unfortunately, people with differences from the typical person, what we need may vary slightly from some of those things, or it may add on, and then it's seen as extra. And why is that? I think it's, it's that same issue of conflating difference with inequality, or of seeing different skills and strengths as being less worthy of access to the basics of our interdependence that we all share. In an affirming home, it's also really important to welcome all family members in activities and respect their needs. So that might mean things like, people talk about specific stuff and it's going to be very different. As we always say, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. But if you have someone in your family who might feel better if they wore headphones during a family event, welcome that. Say, hey, let's bring your headphones. Or if it's better for things to be a little bit fewer people, or maybe a different part of a restaurant, like just trying to really actively integrate family members. Something that was striking in the unanimity of our responses was let people know in your home if they're autistic. Like, a lot of people think that you're protecting your child if you don't tell them. And we heard again and again that from young adults and teens who are trying to make their way out in the world is that they felt like that the tools of knowing that they were autistic would have really helped them to know and to be able to build awareness, because we know we're different. Okay. We do. And that also, I think people said, and I agree, gives you more leeway to begin to feel empowered and to feel more confident about who you are. So yeah, that's a big recommendation from our respondents. And then that said, we also heard that it can be really helpful to learn about autism in your family, as a family, as a couple, and trust your autistic loved one to have their own perspective on it as well. So those things can be really helpful. And in these ways, we can create homes that provide strength and stability and love that we need to grow more independent in the larger world and to begin to change it for the better. So from homes, we begin to talk more, go to a slightly bigger aspect of, hold on, I lost my page. Right, there we go. So from homes, we go just one step out and begin to talk about sustainable connections, thinking about how to connect with others in sustainable and affirming ways. And that's a huge part of building independence and self-determination that many neurotypical people might not realize, because they don't necessarily face the social challenges that we do. It's also a really big aspect of the kinds of interdependence that many neurotypical people take for granted, because for autistic people, connecting often takes conscious and strategic efforts. And by that, I don't mean masking. I mean looking more closely at the details of getting close to other people. And that starts with things like researching and considering possible opportunities for making connections. That might mean finding common interests or potential interests. Like if you want to learn more about animals or gaming or cooking, or everything about Magic the Gathering like Ernie, or like me, gardening or manga or birthdays. I recently connected with a fellow Columbia alumni who's running the Columbia Alumni with Disabilities group, and she's completely obsessed with birthdays. She celebrated my birthday better than just about anyone. I was like, wow, whatever that is, there's probably someone else out there who's interested. And for families and professionals, or other loved ones, that might really mean listening to the autistic person or people in your life and encouraging them to explore what intrigues them and then find common interests with others. It might also mean, this is again from our research with more than 100 autistic young people and some adults, we might prefer interactions with people of different ages or genders. Like, we don't necessarily see commonalities in the same way that other people do. I remember a neighbor who was maybe like 10 or 11 at an age when kids are usually kind of becoming a little too cool to play with little kids, and he would play with my young child quite a bit. And then he was diagnosed as autistic, and diagnosis is something that I'll talk about later. The language is a little tricky, but autistic people don't necessarily think that they should like play with or hang out with people their own age or their own gender, et cetera, et cetera. We're a little more, I guess, less regimented in that way. Also, we may have more online and other non-in-person forms of interactions, in part because it can often be easier for us to find friends that way. We may embrace diverse relationship models. My autistic siblings are the most they have all different kinds of relationship models and we just sort of don't necessarily adhere to the regular ideas about relationships. We also heard from many people that connecting with other autistic people is often really fruitful and often feels safer or more affirming. So to build healthy independence and interdependence through friendships and other connections, we really need to be able to be ourselves. So again, we come back to those 5 principles, especially acceptance and diversity. So from there, we move out from the home and reaching for connection to actually moving into other spaces outside the home. So for many of us, our other adulting facets of what we're working with may include things involved in early independence, like choosing college or choosing an internship or volunteer work or job or training, getting a driver's license, figuring out transportation, living independently. And our goals may also include learning about and practicing autism-friendly workplace and career advocacy. And then finally, in this section, developing truly welcoming public spaces like libraries. And these seemingly basic things that I'm talking about, these sort of very basic things, may be quite complicated and present barriers to the independence and interdependence of autistic people. But we are obviously, I'm here to talk about advocacy efforts and how we can move forward and evolve, but disabled people shouldn't have to carry all the advocacy weight. So while I have a lot of tips for dealing with all these various areas, and I have these principles that I share and such, individual and collective progress in all of them rests not only on our own efforts, but those of our families and our loved ones and professionals, and from there on, communities and cultures and societies and governments as well. And something I want to really underline again is that these values really have universal benefits. So when I invite my audiences to make wherever I'm speaking, online or in person, a safe space, it becomes a space where anyone would be welcome with decency and kindness and respect. So you're a wheelchair user, you're Black, you're autistic, you're queer, wherever you're from, whoever you are, whatever you need to feel comfortable, and whatever your bodily and other expressions and identities and needs, you are welcome in this space. And that comes from acceptance, and that's something we can practice wherever we are. So from here, let's move on to the last part of this talk, which is also in the free online last section of the book, which is changing the world on a larger scale via advocacy and activism. Any clarification questions at this point? Good. Okay, so we can continue to integrate these foundational principles and affirming practices into our daily lives to provide grounding for neuropositive growth and progress in any situation, including our activism. Our research revealed ways to deploy new and more effective tools to generate mindsets and policies and actions that stop the wrongness and the injustice of thinking there's something wrong with people just as they are. Not to mention the policies and laws that are based on this terrible misperception. And again, the tools I work with are designed to change laws, policies, attitudes, environments, etc., that are disabling to us, not to change us. So in this final section of our second book, we discuss tools for shifting cultural norms. Here in our cultures and our spaces, our voice is a tool, our presence is a tool. Our knowledge of and insistence on justice are tools. And we can work to shift cultural norms around neurodiversity by doing things like defying aspects of neurotypical culture that are discriminatory against autistic people. So that means a couple of different things we learned from our research, and I've learned from personal experience as well. It means calling out expectations of conformity or homogeneity, right? When people act like, oh, that person's weird, a lot of the time that person might be autistic. And, being like everybody else is not inherently a good thing, right? So if you're a person with some kind of privilege, whether it's even just speaking privilege, and you're comfortable doing that, like call out those kinds of comments, call out those expectations of people all being the same. Speaking up to dispute autism stereotypes and the deficit model of disability. So we recently took my granddaughters to the doctor, and the doctor asked, had we filled out XYZ form, and it hadn't been included in the form packet. And then she said, well, I'm seeing some signs in them, and we just want to rule out autism. And I looked at her, and I was kind of like, okay, well, their father's autistic, I'm autistic, and I'm pretty sure their mom's autistic, so we're not really interested in ruling it out. And maybe, and she was super nice about it, and the next day I dropped off our books. But that's very common. Language like that is very common. And in my lifetime of advocacy so far, 23 years, I would say that almost every time you connect with someone around something like that, they do better after that. So it's really worth it. A couple more things that we can do with cultures. We can liberate stimming, right? Like make sure that people know that they're welcome to stim. We can be kind of aware of the perils of this neuronormative system. It has very limited ideas of success and intelligence and worth, as I've already discussed. We can watch out for and flag inspiration porn. Inspiration porn is essentially those kinds of things that people share on social where they just were so great because they helped this cute disabled person, or the cute disabled person did something that everybody can do and it was so great. So inspiration porn can be very tricky and very discriminatory. It really is about how we here in a culture hold space. So as advocates and activists, we can demand and call for and represent in our lives, in our actions, all of these changes in cultures, not people. And then we have the next scale up. So that's working for political and systemic evolution. You know what? I can't see time on the way that it is right now. 6:40. So I have like 10 more minutes before. Okay, great. Thank you. So then we have the next scale up, which is working for political and systemic evolution. And that includes things that are very dear to my heart that I could go on and on about. But things like shifting professional paradigms. So I give entire keynotes on shifting professional paradigms and talks on it, and I blog about it. So I'm always happy to talk more about the subject if anyone wants to reach out to me about that. But just starting with getting rid of this disease model of neurodivergence, right? People use a lot of pathologizing language in the medical field and also the educational field. So when people, and something that I will talk about a little more later too, is like we don't all necessarily feel comfortable, like sometimes my brain just shuts down and I just can't say anything. So I'm not insisting that everybody who's going to be the good advocate or ally goes out and speaks up all the time, but maybe it's going to involve writing a letter. Maybe it's going to involve, speaking with other people about it later, or someone you're close to, or asking someone to help you, or it's not necessarily that in that moment you do something, but there are a lot of different ways to counter all of this pathologizing language. Even, you might catch yourself using it in an email or something, or a paper or a talk, and catch that and use that growth mindset to not do that. Neurodivergence is not a disease. It's a very common human evolution that exists in a lot of different forms, and it can be quite glorious. It's not always glorious. There are hard things too, but most of those, all of them, have to do with living in a neurotypical world. Also, as I said before, in cultures, also at a political and societal level, eliminating discriminatory stereotypes. Political and systemic evolution also entails supporting neurodiversity education for law enforcement. A lot of autistic people have a lot of fears around law enforcement, so many of our respondents are involved in developing programs and policies that prevent those potential misunderstandings and unfair treatment, mistreatment, even abuse. And political and systemic evolution also includes being politically active, like being aware of and working to eliminate laws and policies that are discriminatory against autistic people. So just a few examples. There's a lot of lack of support for autistic adults. Once you get out of high school, there's a kind of a cliff there. There are forms of legal discrimination, like custody issues. There are plenty of discriminatory workplace and educational policies and laws. So there's no shortage of good candidates for change. How do we choose what we want to work on, where we want to put our energy? People ask that a lot. And I just say, like, what really matters the most to you? And not only that, because that's really important, but also where do you think you could have the most impact? You know, do you want to work on a local level in your school? In your workplace? You don't have to limit it, but like, is there something that's really dear to your heart? And are there things that you can do about it? Creative things, maybe, or maybe it's not face-to-face, maybe it's writing, maybe it's marching. There's all different kinds of ways to help evolution. So this slide lists some kind of general aspects of inclusive activism. But how do we tackle these practical aspects of working for change effectively? So the two things that are really key with this are research that's going to bring you knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? And then community. We can learn about our rights and learn about autism and neurodiversity. And both of those things, there are so many great places to learn about them. Like, I'm like the library booster, but libraries, online communities, legal rights organizations. There are some amazing online self-advocacy organizations, social workers, teachers, college libraries, there's all kinds of places to learn about these two things. So the more you learn about your rights and the more you learn about neurodiversity, those two things really go together. And then second, we kind of need to build community. And that can be challenging for autistic people. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but just to wrap up this different kinds of tools. So when we learn about neurodiversity and politics and society and rules and laws and policies, and then we advocate for change at the levels we feel strongly about and the places where we feel like we can make an impact, then we can really generate genuine evolution. Those general principles of accepting and honoring autistic voices can help shape our activism so that we're advocating for things that autistic people themselves actually want. There are some kind of legendarily tone deaf, maybe is not quite the right word, but some legendarily offensive autism organizations that advocate quite powerfully at times for things that most autistic people themselves don't want. That's not what we're advocating for here, obviously. So in any kind of advocacy or activism around neurodiversity, the autistic people that we've collaborated with, which is hundreds and hundreds at this point, thousands, really want to be heard as to what we actually are interested in and want and care about. And then we can advocate for change in an affirming way, as well as effectively. And when we do this, then we empower people and we build equity and equality. And then coming full circle, we enable autistic people to offer more to the world when we do so. So learning and building community are the cornerstones of advocacy and activism. And so please remember in your advocacy and activism that we can use inclusive values to shape advocacy for a child, self-advocacy and growing independence, or allyship with an adult or a group. And we can also use those values to shape any kind of activism. And to revisit my main takeaways around those inclusive values, acceptance comes first, unconditionally and radically accepting everyone around you. And then truly inclusive environments and relationships integrate those autistic perspectives along with others. And that to be effective, advocacy and activism must be affirming and driven by the people they aim to uplift. Another point that I really hope you can walk away with is that independence rests in part on our personal efforts, but it also largely rests on positive change in people and cultures and societies, and as well, it rests on interdependence. So how can we be effective in the face of so many challenges? We can show up for each other and just start with the next right thing. And that might just mean smiling at the person next to you, or it might just mean remembering to use more inclusive language. Coming together, as I said, can be challenging for some of us, but it's so vital. So we've got to do it in our own ways. That might mean that you're marching. It might mean that you're writing letters. It might mean that you're connecting online. It might even just simply mean that you're insisting on autistic joy and connection, insisting on being treated with respect in our own lives and treating others right. There's a lot going on in the world right now, so it's really important to not let that anxiety and fear and discrimination prevent our health, our hope, and our progress. So we need to really unite and collaborate as much as we can so that we can ethically and effectively create that necessary growth and changes and evolution in the world so that autistic people, but also all people, can thrive. Thank you. Thanks. Any questions? Oh, and let me go to the last slide. So I have QR codes here. The one on the left is for the guides. And if you go to that one, and then you click on the new book, actually, on the Autistic Guides hub page, you can click on either book, and there's sort of a not really gorgeous or well-designed or even colored properly button for each book. Those weren't designed by us like the books were. So in the button will say online resources or download resources, and that's where you're going to find those free discussion guides on the website. And then the one on the right, if you would like to contact me, I'm going to state my email right now in case anyone has a hard time reading the QR code. My email is it's J and then the word ineffable@gmail.com. I thought that was a really great idea when I wrote my dissertation about the ineffable, and now I have to spend 20 years explaining it. But it's jineffable@gmail.com, and my website is jebphd.com. and Instagram, JenElizabeth. So I put out mailings a couple times a year, maybe 2-3 times. Also, we're doing a third book, and anyone who is an autistic adult and would like to be involved or knows someone who might like to be involved can also reach out. That would be great. So that's the housekeeping, but any questions at all? Yeah. That's a fantastic question that I've actually never gotten before, but I have a gut answer for it. I do think that, every family's different, every autistic person is different, but something that I would start immediately with any child would be to start using inclusive language, to start talking about neurodiversity, to start educating yourself, whether you're a parent, caregiver, sibling, whatever it is, whatever your role in that family is. Learn about autism and in a neuropositive way, talk about it. And then I think as soon as, this is my opinion, I'm not like the queen of when you're supposed to disclose this, but the sooner the better. And I would say when your child seems to have an understanding that, oh, okay, everybody has brains that are slightly different and some people have this kind of brain or that kind of brain. Like, especially, and again, this is probably different for every kid, but, there's a time when kids start to get meaner and at that time it would be so nice to know, like, oh, this is why I might be a little different, and this is an equally valuable way of being, and to have that support at home. I hope that answered it. Again, it's kind of like all the stuff in our books, which is like, here are the parameters, but each situation is going to be really different. But I think that you can safely say that in any family at any time, start being neuropositive, start being autism affirming right off the bat. As soon as you have, I want everybody to do that before they even think they have a neurodivergent family member. Like, let's just, but I guess I'm at odds with some of the population. So yeah, anything else? And no online? Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks.